Right, hello there, and a somewhat weary welcome to you. If you're here, it's probably because you, like us, have a morbid curiosity or perhaps a deeply ingrained sense of justice that's constantly being poked with a very sharp, very expensive taxpayer-funded stick. Tonight or today or whenever you're consuming this digital dispatch of dismay, we're diving headfirst into the murky, alligator-infested swamp of global political malfeasance. Yes, that's right. Welcome to our countdown of the top 30 corrupt politicians in the world. It's a list so depressing, it makes a root canal performed by a drunk badger seem like a spa day. Now, before we begin this soul-crushing cavalcade of kleptocrats, let's be clear. Corruption isn't just about a few bad apples. Oh no, it's more like the entire orchard is owned by a conglomerate that actively encourages worm infestations because, and I quote, they add character and frankly we can charge more for rustic fruit. From embezzlement that could fund a small nation's healthcare for a decade to bribery so blatant it makes a neon sign screaming, "I am bribable" look subtle, these leaders have been involved in some of the most notorious scandals. These are the individuals who look at public coffers and see a personal piggy bank, often smashing it open with the legislative equivalent of a sledgehammer. So buckle up, or don't, frankly. The safety bar on this particular ride fell off years ago due to budget cuts that suspiciously coincided with the purchase of a new yacht for someone in charge. We'll be navigating a veritable who's who of who's taken what, who's screwed whom, and who's managed to cling to power with the tenacity of a barnacle on the backside of a blue whale. It's going to be infuriating, illuminating, and if we do our job right, just a tiny bit cathartic to shine a very bright, very unflattering light on these champions of, well, themselves. Ah, Richard Nixon, Tricky Dick. The man whose presidency imploded with such spectacular, slow-motion devastation, it became the gold standard for political scandals. We're talking, of course, about Watergate. It started, as these things often do, with a bit of light, politically motivated burglary at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Just a little light espionage, a dash of illegal surveillance. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Except it wasn't nothing, was it? It was the tip of a very grubby iceberg of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and a general disdain for the democratic process that was frankly breathtaking in its audacity. The ensuing cover-up, a masterpiece of bungling and paranoia, ultimately led to Nixon's resignation, making him the only US president to ever do so. The impact? Well, apart from permanently etching Watergate into the global lexicon for scandals so big it needs its own suffix. It fundamentally eroded public trust in government, a trust that, let's be honest, hasn't exactly bounced back. Like a plucky underdog in a sports movie. It showed the world that even the most powerful office on earth wasn't immune to corruption, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the system could, albeit painfully, slowly, hold even presidents accountable. Or at least make them sweat profusely on television. Next up, we journey to the Philippines and the reign of Ferdinand Marcos, a man who, alongside his wife Imelda, she of the legendary, some might say mythical, shoe collection, turned the concept of kleptocracy into an art form. For 2 decades, Marcos ruled with an iron fist, often under the guise of martial law, which coincidentally made it much easier to, shall we say, misappropriate vast sums of the nation's wealth. We're not talking about skimming a bit off the top for a rainy day fund. We're talking about industrial-scale looting, siphoning billions, yes, billions with a B, into offshore accounts, Swiss banks and New York real estate. The sheer scale of the embezzlement was staggering. While a significant portion of the Filipino population lived in poverty, the Marcos family and their cronies were living it up like emperors, funded by the very people they were meant to serve. The legacy? A country economically crippled for years, a populace deeply scarred by human rights abuses, and, of course, those infamous shoes, thousands of pairs, a bizarre, almost comical symbol of grotesque opulence built on widespread suffering. It's a stark reminder that behind every glittering fortune amassed by a dictator, there's usually a plundered nation. Let's turn our attention to Zimbabwe and Robert Mugabe, a figure who began as a celebrated liberation hero, a symbol of hope against colonial rule, and then, well, stayed, and stayed, and stayed. For nearly 4 decades, Mugabe clung to power, overseeing a transition that can only be described as from breadbasket to basket case. His long rule was characterized by increasingly authoritarian tactics, violent suppression of dissent, and economic policies so disastrous they led to hyperinflation that made Weimar Germany look like a model of fiscal stability. Remember those trillion-dollar Zimbabwean banknotes? Useful only as novelty wallpaper. The economic collapse wasn't just an unfortunate accident. It was fueled by rampant corruption, cronyism, and disastrous land reform programs that, while ostensibly aimed at redressing colonial imbalances, primarily benefited his political allies and crippled the agricultural sector. Reports of his family and close associates enriching themselves while the country crumbled were commonplace. It's a tragic story, really. A leader who once embodied the aspirations of a nation ultimately became the architect of its decline. A stark warning about how unchecked power and a refusal to let go can devastate a country. Chapter 4, Silvio Berlusconi, the Teflon Don of Italian politics and media. And now, for a European flavour, let's talk about Italy's Silvio Berlusconi, Il Cavaliere, the Knight. Or, depending on your perspective, the jester, the media mogul, the bunga enthusiast, and a man who seemed to collect corruption charges like they were loyalty points at a very shady supermarket. Prime Minister multiple times, his career was a dizzying spectacle of legal battles, accusations of bribery, tax fraud, false accounting, and consorting with underage prostitutes. Honestly, reading his charge sheet is less like reading a legal document and more like skimming the plot summaries for several seasons of a particularly lurid soap opera. What made Berlusconi particularly, shall we say, resilient was his immense media influence. The man owned a significant chunk of Italy's private television channels, which, surprise, surprise, often portrayed him in a rather favourable light, or at least a less criminally indicted light. This fusion of political power and media control created a feedback loop that allowed him to shape public opinion and weather storms that would have sunk any other politician. It raises a rather uncomfortable question. When the person in charge of the country also owns the megaphones, who exactly is keeping them in check? Besides the overworked Italian judiciary, of course. Chapter 5, Vladimir Putin, from KGB agent to Kremlin Kingpin, allegedly. All right, let's address the elephant in the very, very large room, Vladimir Putin. A man who has dominated Russian politics for over 2 decades, cultivating an image of a strongman, a judo master, a bare-chested horse rider, and, according to numerous investigative journalists and international bodies, one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet, a fortune allegedly built on a foundation of systemic corruption. Now, proving this is, shall we say, tricky given the opaque nature of wealth in Russia and the unfortunate tendency for investigative journalists to meet untimely ends or find themselves facing unexpected legal troubles. Still, the allegations are persistent and detailed: vast networks of cronies, state resources diverted to personal projects, opulent palaces like that one on the Black Sea, allegedly, and a system where loyalty to Putin is rewarded with immense financial gain. The Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers. These leaks have offered glimpses into the intricate offshore networks allegedly used by Putin's inner circle to hide and manage billions. It's a system described as a kleptocracy, where the state itself is essentially a vehicle for enriching the ruling elite, all while projecting an image of national strength and stability. It's a masterful performance if you're into that sort of thing, which, for the record, we are not. Chapter 6, Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's pharaoh, who overstayed his welcome. Let's travel to Egypt. Pre-Arab Spring and the long, long rule of Hosni Mubarak. For 30 years, Mubarak was the seemingly unshakable president, the modern pharaoh. His regime was a masterclass in authoritarian stability, propped up by a powerful military and security apparatus. And as it turned out, a healthy dose of systemic corruption that permeated many levels of the state. While an elite connected to the regime amassed fortunes, many Egyptians faced economic hardship, unemployment, and a lack of political freedom, a simmering discontent that would eventually boil over. When the Arab Spring protests erupted in Tahrir Square in 2011, one of the core grievances, alongside the lack of democracy, was the rampant corruption and the perception that Mubarak, his family, and his close allies had enriched themselves at the nation's expense. After his ousting, charges were indeed filed against him and his sons relating to embezzlement and illicit gains, with accusations of siphoning off hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Though the legal outcomes were complex and somewhat unsatisfying for many, the Mubarak era serves as a potent example of how entrenched corruption can fuel popular uprisings when people finally say, enough is enough, or, in Arabic, kifaya. Next, we head down to South Africa, a nation with a painful history of apartheid, and a more recent history of grappling with a different kind of insidious problem during the presidency of Jacob Zuma state capture. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill brown envelope bribery. This was the systematic infiltration and repurposing of state institutions for the private benefit of a few, most notably the Gupta family, business associates of Zuma and his family. We're talking about influencing cabinet appointments, diverting state contracts, and essentially treating the South African Treasury like a personal ATM. Zuma's tenure was plagued by an almost comical number of corruption charges, over 700 at one point, related to an arms deal from the 1990s, even before the state capture allegations fully surfaced. The Zondo Commission, established to investigate these claims, painted a damning picture of a presidency mired in cronyism and graft, costing the country billions and severely damaging public trust in the post-apartheid government. It's a sobering reminder that the fight for freedom doesn't end with liberation. The fight against those who would steal that freedom from within is an ongoing battle. And sometimes the call is coming from inside the presidential house. Let's pop over to Pakistan, a country where political dynasties and corruption allegations often go hand in hand, like a really dysfunctional arranged marriage. Nawaz Sharif, a three-time prime minister, found his career hitting a rather large Panama-shaped iceberg. You remember the Panama Papers, right? That massive leak of documents from the Mossack Fonseca law firm that exposed the offshore dealings of the global elite. Well, Sharif's family members were prominently featured, linked to luxury London apartments owned through offshore companies. Not exactly the kind of asset declaration you want surfacing when you're leading a country. The ensuing investigation, dubbed Panama Gate in Pakistan, led to Sharif's disqualification from public office by the Supreme Court, not directly for corruption initially, but for failing to declare a salary from a Dubai-based company owned by his son. It was a technicality, perhaps, but one that stemmed from the broader questions about the source of his family's wealth. He was later convicted and sentenced in absentia on corruption charges related to the Avonfield properties. It's a classic tale. Power, wealth, questionable offshore accounts, and the eventual, if often delayed, legal reckoning. Or in this case, a very public disqualification. Now let's cast our gaze towards Peru and Alberto Fujimori. El Chino, as he was known, governed with an iron fist in the 1990s, crushing the Shining Path insurgency and taming hyperinflation. For this, some Peruvians still credit him. However, this strongman image concealed a deeply corrupt underbelly. His decade in power was not just authoritarian, it was kleptocratic, with his shadowy intelligence chief Vladimiro Montesinos acting as the chief architect of a vast network of bribery, extortion and embezzlement. Think of Montesinos as the Moriarty to Fujimori's, well, less cerebral criminal mastermind. The scale of the corruption was breathtaking, with estimates suggesting hundreds of millions of dollars were looted from state coffers. Fujimori eventually fled to Japan when the scandals erupted, faxing in his resignation. Yes, the 2000s equivalent of breaking up via text message. He was later extradited, tried and convicted for human rights abuses and, crucially, corruption, including embezzlement and bribery. His presidency is a stark illustration of how authoritarian control can often go hand in hand with systemic plunder, as checks and balances are dismantled, making it all too easy for those at the top to help themselves. Chapter 10. Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's maestro of misery and mismanagement. And now to Venezuela, a country blessed with some of the world's largest oil reserves, yet somehow mired in a catastrophic economic and humanitarian crisis under Nicolas Maduro. Inheriting the mantle from Hugo Chavez, Maduro has presided over an economic collapse so profound it's hard to comprehend. Hyperinflation that makes grocery shopping a weightlifting exercise if you can find groceries. Widespread shortages of food and medicine, and an exodus of millions of Venezuelans fleeing desperation. It's less a functioning economy and more a national cry for help. While ordinary Venezuelans suffer, Maduro's regime and its inner circle have faced numerous accusations of monumental corruption, drug trafficking and plundering state assets, particularly from the state oil company PDVSA. Billions of dollars have allegedly been siphoned off through complex schemes, illicit gold mining and currency manipulation, lining the pockets of a select few while the nation starves. Sanctions have been imposed by numerous countries targeting individuals in his government for corruption and human rights abuses. It's a tragic example of how ideology, incompetence and industrial-scale graft can combine to utterly destroy a nation's potential. Chapter 11. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil's Lula and the car wash cataclysm. Let's samba over to Brazil and the complex case of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, universally known as Lula, a former union leader who rose to become a wildly popular two-term president, credited with lifting millions out of poverty. A true rags-to-riches story. However, his legacy became deeply entangled in Operação Lava Jato, or Operation Car Wash, arguably the largest corruption scandal in Latin American history, if not the world. This sprawling investigation uncovered a massive system of bribes and kickbacks involving the state-owned oil giant Petrobras, construction companies, and politicians across the spectrum. Lula himself was convicted on charges of corruption and money laundering, specifically related to receiving a luxury beachfront apartment from an engineering firm implicated in the car wash scheme. He served time in prison, though his convictions were later annulled by the Supreme Court on procedural grounds, allowing him to run for president again and win. The whole saga is a labyrinthine mess of accusations, convictions, annulments, and fierce political debate, highlighting the deep-seated nature of systemic corruption in Brazil and the incredibly complex, often politicized, fight against it. It's like a telenovela, but with far more spreadsheets. Chapter 12, Viktor Yanukovych, Ukraine's golden toilet enthusiast. Our next stop is Ukraine and the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych, a man whose departure from office was, shall we say, rather hasty. Ousted by the 2014 Maidan Revolution, Yanukovych fled to Russia, leaving behind not just a country in turmoil but also his opulent Mezhyhirya residence, which became a symbol of his regime's staggering corruption. We're talking a private zoo, a golf course, a galleon-shaped restaurant on a lake, and most famously, a golden toilet. Yes, a golden toilet. It's the kind of Bond villain extravagance that almost feels like a parody, except it was allegedly paid for with stolen public funds. The scale of the alleged looting under Yanukovych was immense, with estimates running into the tens of billions of dollars siphoned out of Ukraine through opaque deals, rigged tenders, and outright theft. His family and close associates, often referred to as the family, were accused of systematically enriching themselves while the Ukrainian economy struggled. The discovery of his lavish lifestyle, juxtaposed with the country's economic woes, fueled the popular anger that drove him from power. It's a potent reminder that if you're going to plunder your nation, maybe don't leave such easily photographable evidence of your excesses. Right, let's venture into the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea, and its supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. Now, corruption in a state like North Korea operates on a slightly different wavelength. When the entire state, essentially the personal fiefdom of one family, and the economy is a bizarre mix of state control, illicit activities, and a personality cult that would make a Roman emperor blush, the lines get very blurry. However, the ruling elite, centered around Kim, allegedly lives a life of extreme luxury, starkly contrasting with the widespread poverty and malnutrition faced by much of the population. Reports from defectors and international observers paint a picture of Kim and his inner circle siphoning off state resources, engaging in illicit international trade, including arms and cybercrime, to fund their lavish lifestyles and, of course, the country's nuclear weapons program. While his people starve, Kim is reportedly enjoying Swiss cheese, imported cognac, and luxury yachts. The alleged wealth is vast, hidden, and built upon the systematic oppression and exploitation of an entire nation. It's less corruption in the traditional sense of bribing an official, and more the entire system is designed for the enrichment of one dude and his pals, which, frankly, is just corruption with extra steps and a lot more goose-stepping. Let's rewind a bit and head to Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, under the leopard-skin hatted rule of Mobutu Sese Seko. For over 3 decades, Mobutu wasn't just a president. He was an institution, a self-styled messiah, and the architect of one of the most infamous kleptocracies in African history. He systematically plundered his nation's vast mineral wealth, diamonds, copper, cobalt, treating the national treasury as his personal bank account. We're talking billions, possibly tens of billions, siphoned off into Swiss bank accounts and European real estate. His rule was characterized by lavish personal spending, chateaus in Europe, a fleet of Mercedes cars, chartered Concorde jets for shopping trips to Paris, all while Zaire crumbled. Infrastructure decayed, public services collapsed, and the majority of Zairians lived in abject poverty. He famously said, "If you want to steal, steal a little cleverly," in a nice way. Only if you steal so much as to become rich overnight, you will be caught. The irony, of course, is that he stole so much he became a global byword for dictatorial greed. His legacy is a country still struggling to recover from decades of misrule and systemic looting. Next, we sail to Indonesia and the 32-year reign of Suharto, the Smiling General. He came to power amidst political turmoil and presided over a period of significant economic development, often dubbed the New Order. However, this New Order was also characterized by authoritarian rule, suppression of dissent, and, crucially, systemic corruption on a monumental scale, often described as a crony capitalist paradise. His family, friends, and military allies amassed enormous fortunes through preferential business deals, monopolies, and control over state enterprises. Estimates of the wealth accumulated by the Suharto family and their associates range from $15 billion to a staggering $35 billion, making him one of the most corrupt leaders in modern history, according to Transparency International. While Indonesia saw growth, a significant portion of that wealth was concentrated in the hands of a select few, creating deep inequalities and resentment. After he was forced from power in 1998 amidst popular protests and the Asian financial crisis, attempts to prosecute him for corruption were largely unsuccessful due to his failing health. It's a classic case of power corrupting and absolute power corrupting. Well, you get the idea. Absolutely. Let's make our way to Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and the rule of Jean-Claude Duvalier, known as Baby Doc. He inherited the presidency for life from his father, François Papa Doc Duvalier, continuing a dynasty of brutal repression and breathtaking corruption. While the vast majority of Haitians lived in extreme poverty, Baby Doc and his cronies, including his extravagant wife, Michelle Bennett, were allegedly looting the state coffers to fund a life of obscene luxury. We're talking millions spent on lavish weddings, Parisian shopping sprees, and art collections. Estimates suggest that Duvalier may have embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars from Haiti, a country desperately in need of every single gourd for development and basic services. His regime was characterized not just by theft, but also by human rights abuses carried out by the notorious Tonton Macoute militia. He was eventually overthrown by a popular uprising in 1986 and fled into a comfortable exile in France. Though he returned to Haiti years later and faced charges, he died before a final verdict could be reached on the most serious accusations. For many Haitians, his name remains synonymous with stolen wealth and squandered potential. Now, to Equatorial Guinea, a tiny West African nation that, thanks to oil, should be incredibly wealthy. Instead, it's often cited as a textbook example of a resource curse, presided over by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Africa's longest-serving current president. He seized power in a coup in 1979 and has ruled ever since, with his family and close associates allegedly treating the nation's oil wealth as their personal slush fund. While the country has one of the highest GDP per capita figures in Africa on paper, the vast majority of its citizens live in dire poverty, lacking basic services like clean water and healthcare. The Obiang family, particularly his son Teodorin, who is also the vice president and known for his outrageously lavish lifestyle, think Bugattis, mansions and Michael Jackson memorabilia, has faced numerous international investigations and asset seizures related to corruption and money laundering. Billions of dollars in oil revenue have reportedly vanished into offshore accounts or been spent on luxury goods rather than being invested in the country's development. It's a galling situation where a nation sits on black gold. Yet its people see little of the benefit, a stark testament to how unchecked power can lead to unchecked greed. Let's journey to Cambodia, a nation still healing from the horrors of the Khmer Rouge and now dominated by the long-ruling Prime Minister Hun Sen. He's been in power in various capacities for over 3 decades, making him one of the world's longest-serving leaders. His tenure has brought stability and economic growth, but critics and human rights organizations point to a deeply entrenched system of corruption, cronyism, and authoritarian control that benefits his family and a loyal elite. Think of it as a family business where the business is running a country and the profits are substantial. Reports have detailed how Hun Sen's family and close associates have amassed vast personal fortunes and control significant sectors of the Cambodian economy, from media to real estate to natural resources, often through opaque deals and land concessions that displace local communities. Political opponents and critics face harassment, arrest, and a judiciary widely seen as beholden to the ruling party. While Cambodia has made progress, the pervasive corruption is seen as a major impediment to equitable development and genuine democracy, creating a system where loyalty to the top is the surest path to wealth and power. Now let's consider Cameroon and its president Paul Biya, another of Africa's longest-serving leaders, having been in power since 1982. That's right, 1982. Some of you watching weren't even a twinkle in your parents' eyes back then. His long rule has been characterized by a tight grip on power, disputed elections, and persistent allegations of widespread corruption and mismanagement that have stifled the country's development despite its rich natural resources. He's also known for spending extended periods of time outside the country, particularly in Switzerland, earning him the nickname the absentee landlord of Cameroon. Critics allege that a kleptocratic system flourishes under Biya, with state resources often diverted for personal enrichment by a powerful elite. Transparency International consistently ranks Cameroon poorly on its Corruption Perception Index. While the specifics of personal enrichment can be hard to pin down, the general atmosphere is one where state coffers are seen as vulnerable, and accountability is often lacking. The country faces numerous challenges, including secessionist conflicts and economic hardship, and many argue that systemic corruption exacerbates these problems, diverting much-needed funds from public services and development. A grim turn now to Syria and Bashar al-Assad. Inheriting power from his father Hafez, Assad's rule has become synonymous with a brutal, devastating civil war that has killed hundreds of thousands, displaced millions, and laid waste to much of the country. Amidst this unimaginable human suffering, the Assad regime and its inner circle have long faced accusations of systemic corruption, treating the state as a personal enterprise even before the war, and arguably using the conflict to further enrich themselves through war economies and control over resources. The Assad family and their associates reportedly control vast swathes of the Syrian economy, from telecommunications to real estate, allegedly siphoning off state funds and benefiting from illicit trade. Sanctions imposed by numerous countries have targeted individuals and entities linked to the regime for corruption as well as human rights abuses. The war has created new avenues for illicit enrichment, including control over aid distribution, smuggling, and the exploitation of shattered industries. It's a horrifying scenario where the levers of state power are allegedly used not only to wage war against its own people, but also to profit from their misery. Let's head to Turkey and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a figure who rose from humble beginnings to dominate Turkish politics for 2 decades, initially as prime minister and now as a powerful president. His early years were credited with economic stability and democratic reforms. However, more recently, his rule has been characterized by increasing authoritarianism, a crackdown on dissent, and persistent swirling allegations of corruption involving his family, close business associates, and members of his ruling AK party. It's the kind of talk that gets louder the more you try to silence it. These allegations range from preferential treatment in state tenders and land deals to the accumulation of vast unexplained wealth. Leaked audio recordings, though their authenticity is disputed by the government, have purported to reveal conversations about hiding large sums of money. Numerous journalists and critics who have investigated or reported on these allegations have faced legal repercussions. While Erdogan maintains an image of fighting corruption, critics argue that the system he has built actually facilitates it for those within his inner circle, eroding transparency and accountability. It's a complex picture of a leader who reshaped a nation, but also faces serious questions about the probity of his administration. Now let's turn to Belarus, often dubbed Europe's last dictatorship, and its perennial president, Alexander Lukashenko. He's been in power since 1994, which in political terms is practically prehistoric. His rule is characterized by an iron grip suppression of virtually all opposition and a state-controlled economy that critics allege functions as a personal enrichment scheme for himself and his loyalists. Think of it as a command economy, where the primary command is make sure the boss is comfortable. While Lukashenko cultivates an image of a man of the people, reports and investigations by exiled Belarusian journalists and international bodies suggest that he and his family control vast assets and benefit from opaque schemes involving state-owned enterprises. Sanctions imposed by the EU, US and others have targeted individuals and entities linked to his regime, not just for human rights abuses following rigged elections, but also for alleged corruption. The lack of transparency and independent institutions makes it incredibly difficult to ascertain the full scale of the alleged graft, but the perception is one of a leader who has blurred the lines between his personal interests and the state's resources to an almost indistinguishable degree. Next, we consider Omar al-Bashir, the former president of Sudan, who ruled for 3 decades before being ousted by a popular uprising in 2019. His reign was marked by brutal internal conflicts, particularly in Darfur, which led to him becoming the first sitting head of state to be indicted by the International Criminal Court for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Alongside these horrific accusations, his regime was also notoriously corrupt, with Bashir and his inner circle allegedly plundering the nation's resources, including its oil wealth. After his ousting, large sums of cash millions in various currencies were reportedly found in his residence, a rather literal smoking gun of ill-gotten gains. Investigations suggested that billions of dollars were siphoned off during his rule through opaque deals, and control of state enterprises, depriving the Sudanese people of much-needed development funds. While the ICC indictment focuses on atrocities, the underlying corruption undoubtedly fueled the conflicts and propped up his oppressive regime. It's a grim reminder that mass violence and mass theft often go hand in bloody hand. Let's cast our minds back to Libya under Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. For 42 years he ruled with an eccentric and often brutal iron fist, transforming Libya into a pariah state for much of his tenure, while also using its vast oil wealth to fund his ambitions and allegedly to amass a colossal personal fortune. His Jamahiriya, or state of the masses, was anything but. It was a system that concentrated power and wealth in the hands of Gaddafi, his family and his loyal tribesmen. It was less power to the people and more power and all the cash to me and my mates. Estimates of Gaddafi's hidden wealth stashed in secret bank accounts, real estate and investments across the globe run into the tens, possibly hundreds of billions of dollars, making him potentially one of the richest men in history, all while many Libyans saw the little benefit from their nation's oil bounty. After his overthrow and death during the Arab Spring in 2011, efforts began to trace and recover these assets, a Herculean task given the complexity of the networks he used. His flamboyant and often bizarre public persona masked a ruthless kleptocrat who treated Libya's treasury as his personal piggy bank. Let's travel to Central Asia, to Kazakhstan, a country rich in oil and minerals and dominated for nearly 3 decades by Nursultan Nazarbayev. Even after stepping down as president in 2019, he retained significant influence as El-Bezi, or leader of the nation, a title that conveniently came with lifelong immunity from prosecution. His long rule saw Kazakhstan attract significant foreign investment, but it was also marred by a lack of democracy, suppression of dissent, and pervasive allegations of corruption benefiting himself, his family, and his close allies. It's the classic resource-rich autocracy playbook. Numerous investigative reports and leaks, like the Panama and Pandora papers, have shed light on the vast offshore wealth allegedly accumulated by Nazarbayev's family and inner circle, running into billions of dollars tied to luxury real estate, companies and bank accounts around the world. Critics argue that the country's natural resource wealth was systematically siphoned off, creating a super-rich elite while ordinary Kazakhs saw limited benefits. The 2022 unrest in Kazakhstan was fueled in part by public anger over this entrenched corruption and inequality, leading to a gradual, though still contested, dismantling of some of his lingering influence. Now for a truly unique case of dictatorial eccentricity and alleged corruption, Saparmurat Niyazov, the self-proclaimed Turkmenbashi, or leader of all Turkmen, who ruled Turkmenistan from its independence in 1991 until his death in 2006. He created one of the world's most bizarre and oppressive personality cults. We're talking renaming months and days of the week after himself and his family, writing a spiritual guidebook, the Runama. That was mandatory reading, and erecting a giant gold-plated statue of himself in the capital that rotated to always face the sun. You can't make this stuff up. Behind this gilded facade of megalomania, Niyazov had absolute control over Turkmenistan's vast natural gas reserves, the country's primary source of wealth. Billions of dollars in gas revenue reportedly flowed into opaque, off-budget funds controlled directly by him, with little to no public accountability. While the Turkmen people lived under a highly repressive regime, with limited freedoms and a struggling economy outside the gas sector, Niyazov allegedly used state funds for lavish vanity projects and personal enrichment. It's a stark example of how unchecked power can lead not just to corruption, but to a level of absurdity that would be comical if it weren't so tragic for the citizens involved. Let's head to the Gambia, West Africa's smallest mainland country, which for 22 years was under the thumb of Yahya Jammeh, a truly erratic and brutal dictator. He seized power in a coup in 1994 and ruled with a bizarre mix of mysticism, claiming to have herbal cures for AIDS and infertility, paranoia and ruthless suppression of dissent. And of course, like so many on this list, he allegedly treated the state treasury as his personal piggy bank, systematically looting tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Not bad for a country with a GDP of around $1 billion at the time. After he was forced from power in 2017, following a refusal to accept election results, a brief regional military intervention, and a last-minute deal to go into exile, investigations revealed the staggering scale of his alleged theft. Reports detailed how state-owned enterprises were plundered, public funds diverted to personal accounts, and luxury assets acquired across the globe. A subsequent commission of inquiry in the Gambia found that Jama and his associates had stolen over $360 million. It's a story of a small nation held hostage by a big ego and even bigger greed. Now, let's turn our attention to Hungary and its Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. A dominant figure in Hungarian politics for well over a decade, Orbán has championed what he calls illiberal democracy, a concept that has coincidentally coincided with a significant erosion of democratic checks and balances, media freedom and judicial independence. Alongside this democratic backsliding, there have been persistent and widespread allegations of systemic corruption, particularly concerning the distribution of lucrative state contracts and European Union development funds, which critics say disproportionately benefit his political allies, friends and even family members. Hungary receives billions of euros from the EU, and organisations like Transparency International and the EU's own anti-fraud office, OLAF, have raised serious concerns about irregularities, conflicts of interest, and the funneling of these funds to a politically connected elite. Critics describe a system of crony capitalism where loyalty to Orbán's Fidesz party is rewarded with economic opportunities, enriching a new oligarchy. While Orbán vehemently denies these accusations, the EU has at times withheld funds due to concerns over corruption and the rule of law, highlighting a deep rift over how taxpayer money is being spent and accounted for. We return to the Philippines, this time to look at Rodrigo Duterte, who served as president from 2016 to 2022. Known for his brutal war on drugs that resulted in thousands of extrajudicial killings and drew widespread international condemnation, Duterte also faced numerous allegations of corruption, both during his long tenure as mayor of Davao City and as president. While he cultivated an image of a tough anti-corruption crusader, critics pointed to a lack of transparency and accountability within his administration and questions surrounding his family's wealth. Allegations included unexplained increases in his net worth, the awarding of government contracts to cronies, and involvement in smuggling operations. The Office of the Ombudsman initiated investigations into his wealth, but these were later terminated, raising further questions about the independence of accountability mechanisms. His presidency was a paradox, a leader who spoke forcefully against corruption while simultaneously presiding over a system where such allegations frequently surfaced and often went unaddressed, all overshadowed by a human rights record that horrified many observers. It's a complex legacy, to say the least. And finally, we land back in Brazil with Jair Bolsonaro, president from 2019 to 2022. Often dubbed the Trump of the tropics for his populist rhetoric and controversial style, Bolsonaro campaigned on an anti-corruption platform, promising to clean up Brazilian politics after the Lava Jato scandals. However, his presidency was itself dogged by numerous allegations of corruption and impropriety involving his family, political allies, and his administration's handling of various issues, including the COVID-19 pandemic and environmental policies, particularly deforestation in the Amazon. Accusations ranged from rachadinha schemes, where public employees allegedly kick back part of their salaries to politicians involving his sons, to irregularities in vaccine procurement and interference in federal police investigations. While Bolsonaro consistently denied any wrongdoing, the sheer volume of allegations, coupled with his attacks on democratic institutions and the judiciary, raised serious concerns both domestically and internationally. His tenure highlighted the persistent challenge of corruption in Brazil, even for leaders who come to power promising to eradicate it. It seems the swamp is harder to drain when you're busy wrestling the alligators for a share of the, well, you know. And there you have it, 30 names, 30 cautionary tales of power abused and trust betrayed. Thank you for watching our countdown of the top 30 corrupt politicians in the world. If you've made it this far without throwing something at your screen or descending into a pit of existential despair, congratulations. You have a stronger constitution than most. It's a grim list, isn't it? A veritable encyclopedia of avarice. A testament to the unfortunate human tendency for some individuals, when given an inch of power, to take 100 million miles, preferably in unmarked bills. But here's the slightly less depressing part. Shining a light on these issues, talking about them and demanding accountability is, believe it or not, the first step. Knowledge is power, as they say, even if that knowledge is currently making you want to invest heavily in antacids. Remember to like, share and subscribe for more informative content. Because the more we know, the more we can collectively push back against those who think public office is a personal enrichment scheme. And frankly, we need all the pushback we can get. Finally, this list is by no means exhaustive. Sadly, the pool of potential candidates is depressingly deep. Let us know in the comments if we missed anyone you think deserved a spot, or if you have any thoughts on the list, or perhaps just want to vent. We get it. Until next time, try to keep the faith that not everyone in a suit is trying to steal your dental fillings. Though perhaps check your fillings anyway, just in case.